Welcome to Paley Front Row, part of the Paley at Home series presented by Citi.
Big ideas often start small. When the global payments and software company Flywire wanted to get from here to there, they needed a global bank like Citi. With local teams in 95 countries, Citi was able to help Flywire grow and expand into businesses like education, healthcare, travel, and B2B worldwide. In turn, inspiring the next generation of ideas. For the love of moving businesses forward. For the love of progress. Citi.
If you're here, you know. This is a treat. This show is special, whether, peak TV, any era of television. This show, the Americans would have stood out for its just sheer quality, originality. A lot of what made this show great is a lot of what's missing in our very oversaturated landscape. It was so original and so well crafted, and we'll talk about that. Again, it's very exciting to be here. Very exciting to see some of these folks reunited. I had the pleasure. Again, if you're here, you know about this show. I had the pleasure in the final season. I cannot believe it's going on 5-6 years ago now, but I had the pleasure of. I just can't express how generous, how warm, and how confident the production team, from the showrunners down to all the below the line people, there was such confidence. They invited me in. They knew I was a big fan. They invited me in. I visited the show, I think 7 or 8 times during the production of season 6. We went up to the Terrytown area to film that pivotal scene on the train in the final episode, and it was just an amazing experience. It culminated in a cover story that is truly one of the highlights of my journalism career. And I say all this to say that this group was so warm, so welcoming, and so confident. So many shows, when you're covering them, that your access is so carefully contained. These folks were like, yeah, come on in. As long as I proved that I wasn't going to interrupt scenes, they let me, and it was just, and the other thing I want to say, and then I will stop talking and bring them out, but I really just want to say I remember this so well. Every single time I went down to beautiful Gowanus, Brooklyn, and let me tell you, there were some times when they didn't have to do a whole lot to shoot for the Soviet Union, because it looked pretty bleak. But every single time I went down, whether I was coming or going, or at some point, some member of the crew, a casting director, somebody would come up to me and say, I really want you to know how decent, how kind, how Matthew, Rhys, and Keri Russell, and Joe Weisberg, and Joel Field, how kind and warm they were. Every show says they're a family. Everybody says it's the best experience. But people would stop me and say, I want you to know, and they would give me an example of something a kindness that Matthew had done for somebody. It was just really a truly unique experience, and I can tell how the warmth among these people reunited. You can just really see it. So without further ado, let's bring up Noah Emmerich. Stand there. Noah, if you'll go to the end there, right? Matthew Rhys, Philip Jennings. Keri Russell, Elizabeth Jennings. One of 2 J's, Joel Fields, co-showrunner. The second J, Joe Weisberg. Again, this is a treat. How much did you as actors know at the start of the season the major beats, the major themes? Did you guys have a really strong handle on each season before you started?
I can't remember. Did we?
Well, here's what I remember.
Yeah.
Every season, we'd have about 4 scripts ready before the season started.
Okay.
You guys would read. And we'd ask you if you wanted to know where the season went, and you'd always say no. No, don't want to know. Don't want to know. Scripts would come out. And then around episode 8 or 9, you guys would come to us and you'd be like, Okay, now we gotta go.
It's true. It would just build and build. Every season always did that so effortlessly that by about then you were like, who is going to do it? Who kills the people on the submarine? What submarine? Yeah.
I'm glad you think it was effortless.
Sorry, but yes, seemingly it was.
You didn't develop friendships with the character actors because you knew they.
Oh.
They were going to be dead soon, probably. Yeah.
We always, Joe and I would always call the actors to let them know before the script came out, and we grew to feel like we were clergymen or something. There was this call. We make the call, and eventually, they'd pick up, "Hi," like they knew. They got a call from us at home. Right before script came out, they knew it wasn't good news.
That's so true. It's time.
They either knew they were going to sleep with Elizabeth or be killed by Elizabeth. Or if they were lucky, both.
Either way, one for the clip reel.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
All right. In my experience, one of the highest compliments that a television show can be paid is that it was there in the pilot. Like the elements, and I rewatched the first episode in preparation for this, and by any measure, it was there in the pilot. The key elements, the ingredients that made the Americans, the cat and mouse, the intellectual discourse, who's a black hat, who's a white hat in this world. There are no easy enemies. Some slam bang action, some wit that turns on a dime. All the elements that made the show stand out. As a viewer, it was there in the pilot. When did you all know? When did you know you had something special here?
I think just now when we saw the.
Well, I'm so glad now you know.
No, because you're very insecure about your own work. But I remember that, somewhere around the second season, Joel and I started to have the same feeling that we could tell stories about this forever. And it really was what you're saying about the pilot. There was just enough packed in there, enough relationships and crazy things happening and weird stuff that you could not. We mentioned that to Graham Yost, who was a producer on the project, and he said, "You're not going to feel that way at season 5." And he was right. Around season 5, we started to we don't have a story forever. But that kind of feeling that it's real and it's got branches going off in all directions. I think after maybe in season 2 it started, and it's a very good feeling because you're so nervous about producing that stuff.
Mm-hmm. And of course, Joe, your past experience in your previous life before becoming a showrunner and exec producer, you had familiarity with the world. You worked for a time with the CIA in this.
I did, as we were discussing earlier, that one of the things I saw there was a lot of my colleagues who lied to their kids about what they did. And that just seemed like, I don't think that's been on TV before, not with spies, so and we used that for 6 seasons too.
Let's face it, all parents lie to their kids. You just put it on telly.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
You make a good point.
It's just how convincing you make.
That's true.
And I have a fun fact about Joel Fields. Joel Fields went to college with John Landgraf, the head of FX.
That's true.
And then you went your separate ways, and you became a very accomplished showrunner and creator and EP, and he went and he did okay by himself and still does. But when did you've worked on a lot of shows? When did you have a sense that this was really gelling? Because you two had not worked together before. You had formed a partnership at the instigation of John Landgraf.
Of John and of our mutual agent Joe Cohen and Eric Schreier also. I think there were a lot of people fixing us up. And we joke, but it's true that we had an arranged marriage like Philip and Elizabeth. And it was as productive, but not as conflicted. And we had a very intense first season together because, first seasons are hard. And the first season of this show was hard. It started with Hurricane Sandy wiping out the sets the week before we were supposed to start shooting.
Right.
And it got harder from there. So we spent a lot of late nights into early morning watching the sunrise together in these writers' offices we had in Soho before we moved the writing team out to the studio for the second season. And we forged what has become a great friendship and a great creative collaboration that continues to this day. So we're just feel very lucky and blessed for that.
Mm-hmm. And when did you know? When did you kind of have that feeling like, this is good.
Well, I was going to make the same joke as Joe, as we always do, just now watching, but he used it. But I would agree, actually, somewhere in towards the end of the second season, and there was actually a particular moment, because we really worked so hard crafting that second season story, and there were so many things that we wanted to hit, and there was that mystery with the family that was murdered, and there were a lot of pieces we wanted to get to. But there in particular were some pieces with Stan and with Nina that we kind of found that it was too much to fit in. And I remember we were really struggling, and we were standing at that time, I think that was the only season where we had everything up on a board. Maybe we did that for a couple seasons. But we're sort of looking at it, and there was this moment where we looked at it and said, well, what if we just don't get to that at the end of this season? What if we just let that story go where it fits into these episodes this season? It'll be interesting wherever it ends, and then we'll just be able to tell it when it wants to be told in the coming seasons. And I think that was the moment where we realized, we're just going to let the story tell. We're not going to worry about hitting something here or there. We're just going to let it flow. So I think that was a big moment for us.
That was a moment. Keri?
Oh, I'm going to say something that people talk to me about a lot, which is a lot of times they mention, I don't know what episode it was, but the first season, they say, whatever the episode was that we get like kidnapped or something, and then I beat the shit out of Margot.
That's a
They always talk. They say that we were watching it and it was good and it was interesting, but when that one happened, we were like, oh, okay, here we go. Like the kidnapping us and lying about everything, and they were like, hey, we're in.
Those moments when Elizabeth would lose it were always thrilling. When she would, because so cold and steely and collected, but occasionally with anger, often at Paige or at
Training at Mickey Mouse Club.
What exactly did you say to Margot when you were punching her in the face?
Beat your face.
Something about the face.
Yes,
Show them your face.
Yes, show
Show them your face. Still uses that line.
If it works.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
Okay, Matthew, what about you?
I think it was in the pilot, in the moment, ironically or not, maybe it was not ironic. The scene when I was auditioning for the Americans was in the laundry room when I've forgotten his name. Philip suggests. I was like, Terry? No, Steve. Paul. Yeah, when Philip suggests that they could possibly defect. Mm-hmm. And to me, it was like revealing the bomb under the table, because you saw who Elizabeth was. Mm-hmm. And for Philip to kind of say, we could defect, I was like, how is that going to play out? And I thought, you've just set up, like, that itself can run and run. So it really was that moment for me in the pilot.
Awesome.
I have a very difficult time sort of assessing how something's going to play, or sustainability, or the audience response. It's very hard for me to sort of step out of the intimacy of the crafting of the show, and it becomes very personal for me on some level. So it's very insular. So for me, I think I had no expectation, at all until we started airing, really, and then the reaction was so delightful. People really seemed to engage, and it seemed to have traction in people's imagination. So for me, it was sort of a slow, gradual, like, wow, this thing that we're doing in Gowanus that who knows if anyone's going to see or care about, but I'm loving making it, and I'm working with great people, and this is really fun, and who knows, kind of, I try to ignore the other side of the camera until it's some concrete evidence, and it was in that first season that really people seemed to respond, and I would get a lot of feedback, and critics seemed to enjoy it, and so I was like, wow, this is incredible. Like, it's sort of a dream come true that we're doing this thing which we're having such a great time doing, and the world out there is enjoying it, so we can just keep going. And the scripts got more and more sort of complex and sophisticated, but I thought the setup was all there in the pilot. I mean, it was a phenomenal pilot script, and I thought also a beautifully executed episode. It was a really powerful hour. So I thought we had the goods from the beginning. I just had no idea how the world would respond. And television is such a casino in terms of what are you going to get the eyeballs or not. So,
So much, yeah.
yeah.
And your character, the Stan character, really, you invest from the get-go, from your first marriage to, to the relationship with Nina. I mean, you really invested in that character. Could have been a two-dimensional FBI guy that showed up in the kitchen from time to time and was sort of a plot device, but you really made Stan, and Noah, you made us all, our hearts bled for Stan just as much as, even though we were rooting for Philip and Elizabeth to not get caught, we were also rooting for Stan. It was just really like,
Thank you.
It created such a... It created such a constant tension between those characters, and yet those moments when Stan and Philip would have a beer were just like so fun. It was great. I want to talk a little bit about the changes in the world of spycraft since this, certainly since the time setting of this show, but I also want to talk a little bit about the changes in the world of television craft since this show. As I rewatched this reel and other episodes, I could not believe what you were able to pack into those episodes. And I know you weren't working with a $10 million an episode, $8 million, $10 million an episode budget, which is, shockingly, folks, is almost the norm these days. I mean, that might be a little high, but it is what you all packed into, and I won't say it because, the network will still come and scold you, but what you all packed into what I'm educated guess probably about $3 to $4 million an episode today. I mean, you stretched every dollar for FX. It is amazing, and you did it also at a time. It's hard to believe it's only 10 years, but think about how much has changed in the way we watch television, how television is delivered nowadays. If you were on many places, you'd produce all episodes in a vacuum, and then they would drop on a single day. Have you thought about that? About how this show might play out in a streaming environment? Has that ever anything that you've ever thought about?
Not until now. No. But I will say this, for us, one thing that was really important to us over the first seasons of this show was our and the show's relationship with the television critics. At that time, we'd make episodes, and the show was starting to air while we were still making the season. And it was a time when TV critics were writing, they called them recaps, but you'd read them, and they weren't recaps. They were really deep analyses of what we were doing, dramaturgical explorations of the work. And it was actually,
Guilty.
Well, no, but it was helpful. It really was, because it gave us, you really saw how things were being received at a very deep level. So, I wonder how different it would be had we just done each season without any input and then gotten all that after the fact.
And do you look at shows today and think, oh my God, if we had $8 million or $10 million?
The catering budget might have been bigger.
There's a nice thing about being a smaller budget show. There's a nice thing. There's you're in it to do it. You don't have the people who have these giant trailers, or that was never our show. And the people who wanted to do those kind of shows weren't on our show. You know what I mean? And that helps in a lot of ways. It's people who are kind of in there to do something great and fun, and they're a team player. Sometimes the big stuff isn't always the best stuff.
I think from very, very true words, absolutely. And for sure, I mean, there was so much, you could just see it all on the screen. Yeah. Absolutely. And having actually had the pleasure of watching you cry, you could really see it. There were not a lot of frills in the catering. But that speaks so well of you. I mean, Keri, you could have come in with your star writer and,
Yeah.
But I cannot, like the people that stopped me all those times when I was down there, I can't emphasize enough how much people loved you and felt like, the two of you, you and Matthew, and felt like you set the tone from the top down. You set the tone of, this is a serious show. Never one bit of there's a cast strike at the Americans or something. You always felt.
I want Twinkies.
Yeah. I'm not sharing wigs again. Get your own wig.
But that obviously, it stems from the top, and you and Matthew obviously had to find your way to both creating the characters and running a show like that. What was that the working out of your professional relationship in those early seasons?
No memory. Yeah. Well, I didn't set the tone. She set the tone. Therefore, I had to fall in. I can't be going, I want Twinkies, if she's not. So I've never met a consummate professional, but as much as this one. So I mean this sincerely for once in my life. She set the tone, and everyone else followed suit. And you've always been that way.
Thanks.
I don't want to undermine the extreme niceness of that, but he is like that too, and so is he.
By default,
they really-
because I've learned from her. I was like, oh, you do have to toe the line. You're like, can't complain about the food.
You mentioned all the type of guest stars and the type of people that you attracted were not the type of people that needed a double, an extra wide trailer kind of thing. Again, going through it, it's such a nice mix of wonderful showcases for very established character actors and amazing platforms for people that have since gone on to great heights. Frank Langella, Margot Martindale, Henry Thomas, excuse me, not Henry Thomas, Richard Thomas, totally different show. Richard Thomas.
Henry was his brother that she slept and then killed.
Julia Garner, who is, having quite the career now. Annette, I'm not going to pronounce the name, Mahendru.
Yeah.
Annette Mahendru and Allison Wright.
Yeah.
That was you just had such a collection of folks. Was there something about the process of finding those characters that you looked for personality traits in the actors as who they were as people as well to gel? Or did you just get super lucky with all those folks?
Well, we had an amazing casting director. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Rory Bergman just did incredible work. And I think word gets out on a show, and you expect, you want people who are great to work with, but also, as you guys said, a tone is set. But in terms of the talent of those people, boy, a brilliant casting director, great directors, and wonderful cast for them to work with, and then you just sit back and enjoy.
And was that kind of invigorating for you? Because each season you would bring in, you had your regulars, but you also would bring in some new people to
I think that's the gift
of
of shooting in New York, though, too. I mean, you just have such an expanse of amazing actors who are just here and ready to work. It's different here.
Yeah.
Would you say, was it for guest actors, for people that would come in for a season or for a few episodes, was it, because the tone of this show is so specific and varied, did you find that that it took them a bit to understand the rhythms, or?
I don't know, do you have anything to say on that?
Do you have anything? We bullied them. Look, this is the tone.
Look, it speaks to your previous point, too, which is, it's easier for me to talk about it, but Keri and Matthew both were so incredibly generous and inclusive and grounded and real. Some shows I've done guest spots on shows where the stars are kind of, you don't meet them until you're rolling, and you're lucky to get a hello out of them. That was not our vibe. That was not our set. And it began with Keri and Matthew and Joe and Joel. But in terms of Joe and Joel as producers, it's very mirrored in Keri and Matthew and cast. It was a group effort. There was no hierarchical attitude. There was no star attitude. And you can't come onto a show where their star never complains, shows up as consummate professional, as Matthew said, is warm and inclusive and a helping hand for those that needed it. That environment permeated throughout every department. So I think for the guest cast, I think we got the best out of them because that environment is so warm and inviting, and that's a place where you can do good work. Yeah. And it's a very tough spot. There are some guest spots that are very demanding acting work.
Yeah.
And you come in and it's not your crew, it's not your cast. You're nervous, you're anxious, you don't know the vibe, you don't know the rhythm. And then you see Keri and Matthew and their faces and their energy and their warmth, and you're like, oh, this is going to be okay. And I think that was really the source of a lot of the good work that we got out of all our cast. No one was, they might have been intimidated before they got there, but as soon as they got on set, they knew they were welcome and that everyone was rooting for them to succeed and not peacocking or showing them anything other than, you're here, we're together, we're in this together, we're all going to do our best.
Such an ensemble. And I was thinking, on this show, you could come in high heels and leave in a suitcase.
Way it goes.
What, when you think about also, of course, this was set in the 80s, but you think about the world right now, of course, tensions with the United States and what's now again known as Russia couldn't be higher right now. And if you think about what we know about the spycraft trade now, it's very different from the days of, Elizabeth going out and seducing people in Washington bars and Philip with his master of wigs and everything. Is that something, Joel, in particular, is that something that you've kept up with? Do you kind of watch the craft and think about how the world of the Phillips and Elizabeths have changed in the 30, 40 years since the show?
A little bit. When we shot the show, the truth is it had already changed entirely by then. Mm-hmm. And one of the great things about making it a period piece and going back to the 80s is you got to do this trade graft that was people-based, and that's better for television. It's a lot more interesting than watching things beep and whatnot. But a few months ago, I went back to the CIA. I hadn't been back there once since I worked there. I hadn't been there in 30 years. And I went back and I was talking to some old friends, and they were, talking about literally just the problem of being a spy because you have a cell phone. And everyone knows where your cell phone is, because that's just how it works. So how do you deal with that problem? That is it's an interesting problem, but I'm not sure it's not a sort of conflict between two people. It's a conflict between a person and a phone,
Yeah. Wasn't there just some story with that kid who was in college, the university kid who was just caught? It made me think. So many people sent me that story. They're like, oh my God.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Do people send you when there's big headlines in Russia?
I always write about, I knew about this years ago.
Couldn't say anything.
Oh, clearance. The best thing was when the kids on the show would always what is this? You're like, it's a calculator or a VCR. Yeah. What is this? It's a rotary phone. Yeah. How does it work?
Well, I remember being on set when Holly was the scene where she was calling Pastor Tim to say my parents are spies, and we were just there because it was an important scene, and she picks up the phone, and she cradles it in two hands, and she starts dialing with both her thumbs. And I was like, Holly, what are you doing? She's like, well, I'm dialing the Pastor Tim's number. I was like, no. Hold the phone like this, take your finger like this.
True.
Trust us.
That's
True.
good.
That's funny.
So good.
And we'd be remiss without shouting out Holly Taylor and Kedrick
Yeah.
Salati.
Yeah.
Both of those characters were obviously so crucial to dimension to Philip and Elizabeth. They had, they had some very tough scenes. Holly just, especially the last couple of seasons as she came on, if she wasn't she had to be so good to pull that off. Otherwise, you just wouldn't have bought it.
Yep.
Especially the end. Yeah, but also, Henry and Stan really got me at the end. That was what really got me. It was some of the last stuff was between those two. That really killed me. And, it's choking up right now.
Yeah.
You left your only son in the hands of your neighbor.
Yes, why did you write that, you cruel men?
Were there, one of the fun things I remember seeing in your writer's room is you had kind of a mood board, in the sense of you had a big pastiche of pictures and images from the 1980s, including those phones and Ronald Reagan and all kinds of things.
Right.
That you kind of just used to keep yourselves in that thought. Were there historical themes or threads that you wanted to get to or you had hoped to get to but you couldn't because you just ran out of time or it just didn't work in the story? I will say at one point I was convinced that the ending would be either Philip or Elizabeth dying of AIDS. I was convinced that we were going into that era.
Interesting.
So, and I stuck to that.
That's good. Really? I think that's good. Yeah, that's not bad.
Yeah.
But
Right.
I'm just curious if
Interesting.
Maybe that happened later.
Sure.
Well,
don't you
do
remember?
the
Oh, yeah.
illegal who came on?
Oh, yes, that's right.
Jack.
That was kind of
This-
a part of it.
That's true.
Yeah. We
Wait,
had
wait,
we had an
you've lost
illegal.
me.
No, well, yeah.
Jack Voss.
Jack Barsky.
Yeah, Jack
He was an
Barsky.
actual illegal. He came and met with
Yes.
us, and
Came to set.
the way he
Got out.
got out, because they wouldn't let him go. So he told the KGB, told his handler that he had AIDS, and he said the only thing he said, Jews and gays, they didn't want any part of. So that.
And they said
let him go.
they paid him off. And they said, "Don't ever come back."
Yeah.
And that's what they did. Yeah.
But since you talked about that, here, I'll lighten the mood now.
Thank you.
You went to AIDS, but you mentioned the mood board, and talking about Matthew and Keri as consummate professionals, I want to share a story, which is we also had up in the writer's room, we had just photos of the 8x10s of all the cast members, so be inspired. Oh, there's Nina, there's Elizabeth, and so forth. Joe and I walked in there one day, and someone had Matthew and Keri's pictures had been defaced. There was like a devil on Matthew, there was like a funny mustache on Keri, and we called the assistants in, and we called the staff in, and we said, look, guys, it's all good to have fun, it's fine, but this is a professional and respectful place to work, and we really need to know who did this.
Who did this?
And one of the assistants finally goes, it was Matthew and Keri.
We'd had a boozy lunch. We're like, ooh, new disguise options.
So, yeah. So they stayed up. They stayed up.
And you didn't see that coming.
We should have seen it coming.
Now you know.
Did you, Matthew, Keri, or Noah, did you ever try to influence or suggest a storyline, ever try to influence the direction of your characters at all?
All the time. To no avail.
What I love, you used to tell us, he knows to come up with brilliant ideas, but you said, what you got to do, you got to go in and act it out. And you did, you used to go in
Well, granted, Joe and Joel were incredibly collaborative and open to ideas, and there was always an open door, and I never felt stifled or ashamed to pitch the heroic Stan storyline. But there were some ideas, I think, that got some traction. There were some, not really plot story ideas, but more inside of the plot of story, just how Stan would do something or not. And especially in that first season, we talked a lot about not structural issues, but personal issues to Stan. And I felt I knew Stan better than anyone, and they were very helpful in listening. And sometimes they'd say, "That's a great idea," but most of the time they'd say, "Okay, thanks for sharing that."
Did you pitch racquetball? What about racquetball?
Had nothing to do with racquetball.
I remember Tommy Schlamme, and the first day we shot the racquetball, he just went, "Oh shit!" And I'm like, "Oh, this is really hard."
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yes, the racquetball scenes, of course, the famous line dancing scene.
I don't remember that.
I remember at some other forum you said that one of your worst fears was dancing in public. Did you two know that? And was that?
I don't think so. I think we assumed he was a natural dancer.
Yeah.
Yes. No, and Keri is a natural dancer. I hate dancing, especially in public. Yeah.
Oh my word.
That was my Waterloo. Not a great day.
People love it.
It's a great scene.
Do
That was
they?
a great scene.
Yeah.
Great scene.
I think people.
There you go.
People tuned into the inner pain.
But did you, especially at the end, did you want to exert any influence over the trajectories of Philip and Elizabeth?
No. Sorry.
You asked.
Were you
Yes.
about to say something?
Open to both of you.
As always, interjecting.
I wasn't about to say something.
Oh,
No.
you inhaled.
No.
No, because the writing was so incredible. There was never a moment where it was like, oh, well, I think I've got a better idea than this. I mean, there were a couple of times when I was like, this is a bit outlandish, isn't it? And then they'd be like, no, they did do this. And I was like, oh, God.
Yeah.
KGB are really punchy.
Yeah. No.
Well, that's like the whole, marrying Martha. Everybody was like, who would make up that? And we were like, the KGB.
Yeah. I remember saying, I was like, I don't know about this Martha thing. And they went, they did it. I was like, bloody hell.
Not once. They did it
Many times.
They
Yeah.
finally named a program the Secretary's Offensive.
That is offensive.
Yes, we always said that the outrageous things are the things that we
Yeah.
take from reality.
Yeah.
The non-outrageous stuff is the stuff we made up.
Racquetball.
Yeah.
But like the way Nina was executed, that was just moment for moment the way they executed prisoners.
It is a tough business.
Yeah.
Hey, that was their version of humane.
Yeah.
Why put somebody through years of appeals when you know it's going to end?
That's a perfect segue to, now you know I was going to ask this. What do you think, so I guess in the timeline of the show, 10 years after 1987-ish, they're on that bridge, spoiler alert. I cannot hear With You or Without You without thinking of that moment. So 10 years after that, where are they? Where are Philip? Where are Elizabeth? Where are Paige? Well, I know Henry. Henry's a high school hockey coach. Like that much is clear. Paige, I'm convinced, is still in the family business, but we were just talking, we're hoping maybe she's now working for the Ukrainians. But I'm hogging the mic. I would love, does anybody have any thoughts on where the characters are 10 years after the time frame of the finale?
No, I feel like it was such a perfect ending for all of them that I like to leave them encapsulated in that little moment of like perfect writing. It was just perfect. Yeah.
I pitched a spin-off where Paige changes her name to Stormy Daniels and penetrates the oval. Just a thought.
If we can rewrite some other elements of that story, I think we'll all get.
Yeah.
Well, we could go on another hour, but our time is short. But I have a little surprise for the audience. I just wanted to reinforce once again, reinforce what a wonderful group of folks this was, and just what a special moment in time. I think it was a very special moment in time. Even it was sort of just before peak TV, and it was a special moment in time, a very special sui generis show. But it was also that one reason the Americans worked is what people say, like all successful television shows are flukes. They're all, there's no formula. You cannot create a successful you have to have the right moment, the right star, the right moment in pop culture, and you also have to have the love and affection, and the network that you're on has to really get the show and get behind it. And I've never seen a better example of a network loving a show and nurturing a show, keeping it on the air. Although it is now one of the most streamed FX shows now. I know that is one of the most streamed FX shows. In its moment, it was not rivaling The Walking Dead in terms of ratings. Quality off the charts, but the ratings were. But it was so good that the entire FX team knew it was good and was saying, how can we not invest in quality?
I just want to say very quickly and agree wholeheartedly with every element that you've just said as much. But truly, we've all said this time and time again, the one thing that we owe an enormous debt of gratitude to were the fans of the Americans who followed this, and that is all of you, because without this base, we wouldn't have been nothing, and we appreciate every one of you.
thank you so much. Can't wait to see what's next from all of you.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank
Cynthia.
you.
Here.